Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council for Tuesday, January 22nd, 2019. We are a little bit short of a quorum at this point. I do expect to reach quorum shortly, but let's move directly ahead to at least our first information item, members, and that is a status update on the 2040 Comprehensive Plan reviews. Angela Torres is here to present. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Torres, the manager of Local Planning Assistance. And I just wanted to come today, give you a quick update about where we are with the comprehensive plan updates. You might remember this regional planning cycle. You've been through development of the regional development guide. You've helped to develop and approve system and policy plans for the council. Council issued system statements in 2015, and right now we are at the local comprehensive plan process here. So you may remember as well that in 2018 you offered extensions twice throughout the year to assist communities that may not otherwise be able to meet the end of year deadline. That deadline was December 31st of 2018, which is why I'm before you today. You can see the geographic representation of the extensions that were requested from the council on this map. So with the deadline just having passed, we're right now in the midst of reviewing local comprehensive plans against the regional system and policy plans. We have 188 jurisdictions in the region. Scott and Carver County have land use authority over the townships in most of the townships in their jurisdictions. Credit River Township has assumed land use authority for themselves this planning cycle. So we have one additional, so it's 168 this time that we'll be reviewing, and I'll edit the Carver and Scott counties cover 20 townships now because of the Credit River Township plan. So this decennial cycle, we also offered preliminary plans. You may remember getting copied on the flurry of them because there were 95 of them throughout the region. Preliminary plans were encouraged but not required. And now to where we actually are today. So 168 plans will be submitted. 95 preliminary plans were reviewed. 81 official plans have been submitted for review. That does include ones that you've already authorized, has been for you. And that's 6. So this goes into a little bit more detail, showing that 48 plan reviews are still in process, and we sent 27 letters out to cities. Those are generally incomplete letters, part of the normal process. A lot of things related to internal inconsistencies within the plan, largely relating to wastewater, land use, or housing comments. And then I'll apologize again. These numbers are already out of date because we sent out about 10 letters today. We'll send out about 13 tomorrow, and then by the end of the week, an additional 5. So this is kind of crunch time for us between last week and this week for all of the plans that were received at the end of the year. Council has 15 business days to respond to any submittal. It doesn't apply just to the Metropolitan Council. It's not specific just to comprehensive plans either. That's any public agency responding to submittals to communities is at 15 business days. And December 31st and January 2nd are aligning right now in this week. So that's where we are with our plans. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Councilmember Munn.
Mr. Chair, Angela, with so many extensions, the next council is going to be reviewing comp plans. Is there a plan to teach new council members how to review a comp plan, what they should be looking for?
Chair and committee member, the answer to that is emphatically yes, particularly before we would present any plan that would come forward. We would give an overview of all of the steps along the way, the policy plans and the system plans that the council reviews local plans against, and talk a little bit about how we actually do reviews. What does an inconsistency mean? What does an incomplete mean versus um, uh, conformance issue too? So there are different levels of review that we do, and we would obviously be talking about each of those things before we would expect a new council to respond or take action on anything.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Mott?
Mr. Chair, Angela, I'd just like to thank your staff for the hard work that they're doing. Every time you pre-review a plan, I get the 8-page letter with all the details of things that folks need to look into.
Right.
I really appreciate the work and I appreciate how helpful that is to cities.
Councilmember, thank you very much. We are working very hard and very intensely to meet our statutory requirements, and that's taking a lot of extra effort. And it's not just local planning assistance staff that are doing that, but staff across the council in the various technical specialties, wastewater staff, housing staff, environmental staff, transportation staff. I could go on. There's so many units that we're coordinating with right now. So I thank you and I appreciate that comment.
May I add?
Please.
I'd like to add also, council members, so you know that we may, I don't want to jinx us, we may have one or two that come before you before the end of your term and before March. We'll know by the end of this week if that's the case. But once we find a plan that's complete for review, as you've probably heard me say over the years, that our plan is always to move those plans that are complete through the review process and expedite that as quickly as we can, especially knowing that we'll have another 160 behind them. So we'd like to get those scheduled, and you may start to see those coming up on agendas in the future, especially as we get into February and March.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Members, with a quorum present, let's move back and do a formal approval of our agenda this evening. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The agenda is approved. And next, our minutes of December 17th, 2018 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there changes or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Minutes are also adopted. Thank you. First of our 6 business items is 2019-3 Above the Falls Master Plan Amendment for the Graco Scherer lumber site. Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. Tracy Kinney, welcome.
Chair Commerce, committee members, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. My name is Tracy Kinney. I'm the Parks Planner, Regional Parks and Natural Resources. Today before you is the Above the Falls Regional Park Master Plan Amendment. It is for the Graco Company at the Scherer site, and is a proposal from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. The Above the Falls Regional Park is centrally located in our regional park system. It's located in downtown Minneapolis and spans from the Plymouth Ave Bridge all the way to the St. Anthony Parkway, and just above that. On the left-hand side is a image of the master plan boundary, and circled in magenta is the site under question. The image to the right is the Scherer property. You may have remembered it. The master plan came before you. We have an original master plan that was approved by council in 2001 with an amendment 2012, 2014, and 2015. The 2015 amendment brought the Scherer property into the regional park system, and then also showed a development concept for this parcel. The parcel is lined by Plymouth Avenue. It's all the way south of the park. North of it is 10th Avenue Northeast, and the Graco Corporation. To the east, to the west is the Mississippi River, which is a very important component of the Falls Regional Park. And to the west, to the east, is Sibley Avenue Northeast. a little bit of context for you. Uh, the Minneapolis Park Board has been in a long-term negotiation with the Graco Corporation in order to purchase the land that's just outside the boundary and just south of their site. They finally have come to an agreement, and before you today is one part of this multi-pronged negotiation. The blue arrow is land to be removed from the regional park system, and the green arrow is the land to be added to the regional park system. So before you today is a land exchange of these two parcels. They're very small. They're only 2.0 acres. They have very similar characteristics. Essentially, they're finished development parcels with Kentucky bluegrass. And they both contribute to the park similarly, recreationally and natural resource wise, with being extra area for the Mississippi River to have restoration, management, and recreational activities in the future. So the current master plan is shown here in green, and the proposed master plan is in blue. In addition to the land exchange that you would be considering today is also a minor boundary adjustment. The land that is currently within the master plan boundary is encumbered by a council agreement and restrictive covenant. We would be placing the same agreement and restrictive covenant on the land to be added to the system. Council reviews or council staff reviews a land conversion like this with the Chapter 6 of the Regional Parks Policy Plan. This is the System Protection Strategy 2. We look at land that is proposed through an equally valuable lens, and we have a situation with which staff thinks that we have an equally valuable exchange. That land would be contiguous to the regional park system, and in this case it is. It would be of comparable natural resource value and also of comparable recreation value, and in this case we find that it is. The Strategy 2 has a number of criteria that staff uses to evaluate the proposal. Two that stand out is are before you. One of them is before you is whether the specific site requirements are unique to the site, and the land to be removed is actually quite unique to the site. The Graco Corporation would like to vacate 10th Avenue South, 10th Avenue Northeast, which is that street that's just north of the Scherer site property, and they'd like to do so in order to expand their campus and add a building. The building would be very, it would be essentially office in nature and an extension of their office administrative facilities that they have right now. The right of way would be enough in order to vacate 10th Avenue Street Northeast. And then an additional criteria, which is really important for this proposal, is whether or not the a land exchange would be of benefit to the park system, and we find that it does provide a greater benefit to the park system, primarily because it alleviates this long-term agreement that allows the use of Graco land for regional park system use, both the above the falls park area, but also the East Bank Trail, which connects all the individual parcels of the park. It also adds width to the park itself, allowing for more restoration of the Mississippi River, and it expedites the regional park, the development of the regional park, particularly this site, as part of that multi-pronged agreement. The Graco Foundation, which is an arm of the Graco company, has approved million for the development of the park so that it will be moving forward faster. And then also they're requesting naming rights for this small park within the greater regional park system. So with that, staff proposes that the proposed master plan is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, particularly Chapter 6, System Protection Strategy 2, Conversion, and Chapter 4, Setting and Acquisition Policy, Regional Parks General Criteria, and other council policies, primarily 2040 Thrive, uh, livability, quality of life, and collaboration. And the proposed action before you is to approve the release of the restrictive covenant on 0.2 acres of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board owned land within the Velvet Falls Regional Park in exchange for placing a restricted covenant on 0.2 acres of Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board owned land adjacent to the regional park as described in Figure 3 and depicted in Figure 4 of the business item. And then also to approve the minor acquisition master plan boundary amendment to the Above the Falls Regional Park master plan that removes the 2.0 acres and adds the 2.0 acres as depicted in Figure 4. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much for the report. Councilmember Cunningham.
Mr. Chairman, I plan to move this item, but I just had one question and trying to understand the restrictive covenant and why that was put in the first place, and
Yeah.
what are we really changing about that covenant, and what was the council's purpose in putting that in place?
Chair Commerce, committee member, uh, thank you for that question. The restrictive covenant was put in place because that particular parcel was purchased with council bonds and legacy funds. And because of that, the council puts a restrictive covenant in place, which limits the use of the land and limits also the sale of the land, particular for open for regional park system purposes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd move this item.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to second it and also add
Okay,
that
Councilmember Wolf.
the boundary of the park was somewhat arbitrary when it was originally chosen because the Scherer lumber property was larger and the park board bought part of it with council money and legacy money and the other part with their own funds for redevelopment. And they just sort of picked a line in the middle that seemed like it was going to work for the two uses. This is just a minor adjustment to that line to better align with their uses. So I certainly support it.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there a discussion to the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item, members, is item 2019-21, the City of Eden Prairie's Notterman Residential Development Comprehensive Plan Amendment. That's review file 240121, and Peterson Residential Development Comprehensive Plan Amendment, review file 240122. Made sense to pair these together. Mike Larson is here to
Good
present.
afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Michael Larson, Senior Planner with Local Planning Assistance. So the City of Eden Prairie has submitted the Noterman and Peterson Residential Development Comprehensive Plan Amendments for Council review. And as Chair Commerce had mentioned, these were two separate actions by the city that we are reviewing concurrently because of their similarity. I do want to mention that city staff were not able to attend the committee meeting today, but due to a previous engagement, but they did share, Julie Klima, city planner from the City of Eden Prairie, did share with me comments via email that I will share with you during my presentation. I also want to acknowledge that the Noterman and Peterson property owners who are affected by the amendment, their representative is here in the audience as well. That's John Shardlow from Stantec. So I just want to acknowledge that. So as shown in Figure 1 of the staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 gives the City of Eden Prairie a community designation of urban. The area affected by the two amendments is shown in red, which is located in the southern part of the city along Flying Cloud Drive. As shown in Figure 2 of your staff report, this map shows regional systems in relationship to the amendment locations. As noted in the staff report, a multi-purpose trail is under construction in conjunction with the reconstruction of Flying Cloud Drive. This portion of Flying Cloud Drive is part of the Bryant Lake Regional Trail Search Corridor, which is not shown on the map, as neither a complete alignment nor a master plan for this trail have been completed, and that's why it's not shown on this map. The map also shows the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, which the staff report explains is recognized in the Regional Parks Policy Plan. I will note that the green area shown on the map is the federally designated boundary of the refuge. While this area does include land owned in fee by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, much of this area is privately owned land in the floodplain. Its situation is somewhat analogous to Regional Park in Holdings. Next. So the maps above, maps here show change in guiding land use of the Noterman site on the west. This is located northwest of the intersection of Flying Cloud Drive and Spring Road. Shown in pink is location of the Lion's Tap bar and restaurant. The amendment re-guides just over 8 acres from rural to low-density residential and incorporates this area into the wastewater service area. These maps show the change in guiding land use at the Peterson site, located northeast of the intersection of Flying Cloud Drive and Spring Road. The amendment re-guides just over 7.5 acres from parks and open space to low-density residential and incorporates this area and an adjoining 4.7 acre area currently guided as low-density residential into the local wastewater service area. So the amendment locations are shown here on this aerial photo outlined in red. The thin green lines are topographic contours, and they represent a change of elevation in 10 feet between the lines. The hash marks represent the 100-year floodplain, which includes not only the wildlife refuge, but also the floodplain for Riley Creek. The general area includes high-quality habitat classified as outstanding in the Natural Resources Inventory Assessment Database. Areas not suitable for development to the north of both locations have been acquired by the City of Eden Prairie, including the aptly named Prairie Bluff Conservation Area north of the Peterson Amendment location on the east side. And as explained earlier, the amendment locations are immediately north of the official boundary of the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. So I do want to share, I think it's an appropriate time to share the comments that I received from the city. I won't read the whole email I got from Julie Klima, but I'll read I think the most important part. Records, this is from Julie, the records show that the city prioritizes preservation of bluff, shoreland, and floodplain areas and has tools in place through the development review process to ensure preservation of these features while balancing development potential. The staff report shared with the CDC does not effectively highlight that position, which was communicated through the local review process by staff, planning commission, and city council members. So having said that, so as we go through the findings for this particular amendment, I do want to remind the committee that the council reviews plans and amendments against regional policies and for potential impacts on or departures from regional system plans. The potential additional wastewater flow in this area is insignificant compared to the existing reserve capacity in the regional wastewater conveyance and treatment system. And although development on these sites are not consistent with natural resource policies, specific development is not yet proposed at this time, and continued review of the sites by the city and various agencies may result in an outcome that minimizes the negative impact that development would likely bring. So with that, we propose the following findings: that the amendment conforms to the regional system plans, is inconsistent with the natural resource policies in Thrive MSV 2040, but consistent with other policies. It is not compatible with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge Comprehensive Conservation Plan, but compatible with the plans of the other adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So our proposed action for you today, and it's a little bit lengthy, I guess I will read it all consistent with past practice, that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Eden Prairie to place the Noterman residential development in Peterson residential development comprehensive plan amendments into effect. To find that the amendments do not change the city's forecasts. 3, find that the amendment is inconsistent with natural resources policies in Thrive MSP 2040 and that urbanization of the area is inadvisable. Urbanization of both amendment locations at even low residential densities can result in the permanent loss of the site's existing diverse ecological integrity, with the process of grading for buildable home sites, provision of necessary support infrastructure, and the inevitable introduction of invasive vegetative species into the area. 4, that the council strongly encourage the city to reconsider the development of these properties due to the limited development capacity and the potential for environmental degradation on and adjacent to these sites. B, complete further analysis to determine the level of development that is suitable for each site, including environmental review, steep slopes, bluffs, tree removal and replacement, cultural/archaeological studies, and shoreland and floodplain information. And C, collaborate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other entities that consider the overall environmental aesthetic conditions of the refuge and its surroundings. Finally, to advise the city to implement the advisory comments and review record for natural resources, which basically states things and the other actions. Now, with that, concludes my formal presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Councilmember Munt.
Mr. Chair, a comment on this. Normally, this would come to us after the residential development proposals have been brought to the city. This is coming to us as a comp plan amendment, and I spoke with the city manager, and he assures us that the city will look at both the protection of the environment and the protection of the bluff, given the inconsistency with our natural resources policy. But I'm going to move approval of the comp plan amendments because they are consistent with our system plans.
Thank you. There's been a motion. Is there a
Second.
second? It's been seconded. Is there additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Our next item, members, is 2019-19 City of Shakopee Downtown Mixed Use Comprehensive Plan Amendment.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Raya Smiley, and I'm a senior planner and local planning assistant here to present to you the Downtown Mixed Use Comprehensive Plan Amendment from the City of Shakopee. Before I start, I also want to acknowledge that Joe Whiting, senior planner from the City of Shakopee, is here in the audience and has offered to answer any questions, additional questions that you may have about this amendment. So as shown in figure 1 of your staff report, the Thrive MSP 2040 gives the City of Shakopee a community designation of suburban edge, and the area affected by the amendment is shown in red, which is basically within the downtown Shakopee. This is also included in your staff report as figure 2. The map shows the regional systems in relation to the amendment site. The Scott County Regional Trail runs adjacent to the amendment site, but it is in conformance and consistent with our plans, so that wasn't a problem. So before you, this is existing and proposed plant land use. On the left side, the existing plant land use as is currently. The amendment is guided. The amendment area is guided as mixed use. As a mixed use guiding, it allows for 3 to 5 units an acre for density, but it is being suggested to be changed to downtown mixed use, and that would allow for about 28 to 125 units an acre. This is to ensure that the existing development within the downtown Shakopee currently is consistent with their own land use plan, and that because the currently buildings exist in this area that go beyond that 3 to 5 units an acre already, and they also have a couple of redevelopment projects proposed that are within this area, that the unit count would be higher and the density would be higher than that. So in order to be consistent they're suggesting this new land use category of downtown mixed use for 28.01 to 125 units an acre. The downtown mixed use category will also allow for up to 95% residential. So with that, our findings show that the proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdiction. And the proposed action before you is to adopt the review record and allow the city of Shakopee to place the downtown mixed-use comp plan amendment into effect. Find that this amendment does not change the city's forecast and advise the city to implement the comments in the review record for housing. With that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the report.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move this item.
Councilmember Cunningham has moved the item. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. Is there discussion to the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
The next item is also Raya's presentation, and that is the 2019-20 City of Minnetonka 11650 and 11706 Wayzata Boulevard Comprehensive Plan Amendment.
Hi again. This other amendment before you is from the city of Minnetonka. As shown, this figure 1 of your staff report shows the location of the amendment. This shows that the city of Minnetonka is a suburban community, and the affected area within the amendment is basically adjacent to Highway 394. Is along Highway 394. Sorry. So this map, which is also figure 2 of your staff report, shows the regional systems in relation to the amendment. The dashed red line that goes right by the amendment adjacent to the site, that signifies the I-394 Highway 55 project to be studied under the TPP increased revenue scenario. So that is nothing existing at the moment. It's just proposed to be studied at a later time project.
This is you too, isn't it? Or is this?
So as shown in this, as figure 3 of your staff report, this is the existing and proposed planned land use. The amendment proposes to change 2.5 acres from service commercial to mixed use residential. The mixed use category allows for up to 25% residential development at a minimum density of 12 units an acre. This change reflects the direction that the comp plan is going towards, but because the comp plan is still in the process of being developed and submitted and not complete yet, they submitted this amendment to be able to move forward with any proposals that they may have on this site. This is generally showing the site plan, and it includes 175 units, which basically results in a density of 70 units per acre for the site, and that's figure 4 of your staff report. And the change is consistent with the city's plan and council's land use policies. The overall density of development in the city remains above 5, like close to 5.5 units an acre, which is unchanged, basically. With that, the findings are that the proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with plans of adjacent and affected jurisdiction. And the proposed action before you is to adopt the attached review record and allow the city of Minnetonka to place the 11650 and 11706 Wayzata Boulevard Comprehensive Plan Amendment into effect. Find that the amendment does not change the city's forecast and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for housing. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval and recognize the City of Minnetonka's efforts to increase density and affordability in the community.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. Is there further discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Raya. Next item is 2019-17, City of Burnsville, Healy Rami, Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Patrick Boylan here to present and pronounce the name correctly.
Rami, Keely Rami. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. The city of Burnsville is located in northeastern Dakota County with a designation of suburban. The site itself is located very near the split of 35E and 35W and just south of Highway 42, so it's very well connected to the region and parts outside of the region. The amendment or the proposal before us is to develop a multifamily parcel. It's guided business, and they want to change it to mixed use, office mixed use. So the development, the change before us would allow a project up to 450 apartments and 60 owner-occupied townhomes on the site. Currently, the guiding right now, as I said before, is this business mix, and the proposal is to change it to this second part. Sorry, exact name. Sorry, to mixed use. My apologies. The findings for this are some of the ones you've seen just prior to this, that the amendment conforms to regional systems, is consistent with regional policy, and is compatible with plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. The proposed action before you and for the council would be that to adopt the review record and allow the city of Burnsville to place the Healy-Rami comp plan into effect, and that the amendment does not change the city's forecasts, and that there are implement the advisory counts and review record for forecasts and housing. I did have a chance to speak to staff today. They were not able to make it today, but I'm available for any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I'll move the matter.
It's been
Second.
moved. It's been seconded. Is there discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries also. Thank you. Our last business item is 2019-18 City of Lino Lakes I-35E Corridor Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Corinne Wendell. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. The last item here is from the City of Lino Lakes, the I-35E Corridor Amendment. And so first, for Figure 1 in the staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 gives City of Lino Lakes the designation of emerging suburban edge. And so the area shown is in red of the affected area for the amendment. And Figure 2 of your staff report shows the regional systems in relationship to the amendment site, and there's no significant regional systems that are affected by the boundaries of the corridor. Then in Figure 3 of your staff report shows the existing and proposed planned land use. And so the amendment considers 3 changes to the 2030 land use plan. So the first 2 are the 559.23 acres that will be reclassified from urban reserve to business campus, commercial, and industrial. And then the second one would be to add a new category of business campus to the 2030 comprehensive plan. Then in Figure 4 of the staff report, it shows the existing and proposed planned land use with the full build, and that depicts an additional business campus land use designation, which is outlined in black. And the city does define a full build out as something that would happen post 2030 as the city realizes its maximum development capacity or ultimate development, and the urban reserve portion of the city is developed. And so the third change to the 2030 land use map would be for the 278.71 acres that would be reclassified from commercial, industrial, and medium density residential to that business campus land use category. There's also additional changes to the 2030 utility staging maps. And so it'd be 226.53 acres changed from stage 2A planned service area to stage 1B planned service area, and then 559.2 acres to change from Stage 2 Plan Service Area to Stage 1B Plan Service Area on that utility staging map. Then our findings are that this proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. And that the proposed action that the Metropolitan Council would adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Lino Lakes to place the I-35E corridor comprehensive plan amendment into effect. Find that the amendment does not change the city's forecast, and then also advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for housing. And so with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, very. Mr. Chairman, I'd move this item.
Okay, Councilor Browningham moves the item. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. Discussion to the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We have one more information item as well to dive back into our work on the 2019 Annual Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan. I wonder, while Paul and Libby are getting settled, Lisa, I wonder if you want to just describe our correspondence earlier about the fact that a number of these amendments were all on a time frame where we accepted amendments to the 2030 comp plan through the end of 2018. Do you expect any?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Additional ones.
Absolutely. We did. This kind of reflects kind of that last hurrah of 2030 comprehensive plan amendments. As you recall, we originally had set the deadline to submit amendments to 2030 plans as June 30th of 2018, wanting to avoid having amendments and comp plans at the same time. As Angela noted, having 81 comp plans to review and a dozen some odd comp plan amendments can be a little overwhelming. But because of some additional input from local governments, then we decided to change that deadline to December 31st of 2018 for amendments to 2030 comprehensive plans. So in a bit of last minute rush, these are all the amendments that got completed and were found complete for review by the end of 2018. And you will see the ones we had today, and then we'll have a couple more on our next agenda, and that will reflect and kind of round out any additional changes to 2030 plans. And the focus going forward will be on 2040 comprehensive plans now.
Great, thank you. Thank you. It's helpful to share with the committee. So, welcome.
Thank
Good
you,
afternoon.
Mr. Chair. I'm Paul Burns, manager of Livable Communities, and Libby Starling. So we're back before you again to talk about the what we put into the fund distribution plan that we hope to bring to you at your next meeting for your action, and then forward on to the council. We have been in conversation with several communities since the last meeting. The staff has continued to work on some of the issues since the last meeting. So we want to talk about what we talked about last meeting. The Equity Advisory Committee also considered some input into the process, and continued discussion about some of the issues, as well as any thoughts that you might have. So since the last meeting, and I apologize because I was out of the office last week, so I wasn't able to reconnect with some of the folks, but we did have conversations with Metro Cities, and I believe they sent us a letter today. I believe that was distributed to you.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to the city staff from Rosemount, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, and Minneapolis, and I just received an email from staff from Minneapolis today, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And I also spoke with staff from the city of Hopkins this afternoon too, and I will fill in that conversation. I did not hear back from Eden Prairie or Hastings, so apparently they didn't have any strong feelings one way or the other, and I had gone through some of the changes, most of the changes that we're talking about. So again, as I mentioned, February 4th, we hope to have you act on the plan. February 13th, the council action, and um, we'll send out the notice of funding availability in March. And in the meantime, our staff has already scheduled some voluntary design team meetings to start early next month. So we're moving forward, and we're continuing to try to amp up our outreach efforts to help communities better understand what we're looking for, help them with their applications, and clarify any questions they might have. So moving on, what we heard in December were some issues that we had posed in front of you, and we're continuing to develop them for inclusion in the plan. Smaller jobs projects for the TBRA program. Local housing incentives funds will be available for sub-allocator applications. So I think I mentioned at the last meeting, sometimes we don't, well, not sometimes, but if people apply for housing funding through Minnesota Housing, those are the ones that we see, but if they've applied through a sub-allocator, we don't see those, and we're just trying to open up the envelope so that if there's some of those projects that we can help out with, we want to do so. So we're continuing to move on that. We're looking at eligibility for land acquisition for the demonstration account and the TOD category of the demonstration account. And we did hear some feedback on that, both from the city of Brooklyn Park. Was that in Brooklyn Park? And a couple other cities. One thing I didn't do an adequate job, I think, when I communicated with Brooklyn Park was that it's not just for housing projects, but also for the language would be for the retention or creation of jobs made accessible to low income and underserved populations. And I suspect that might have helped them feel more comfortable with what we're proposing. And then one comment or one issue that we received a comment from the city of Brooklyn Park and also just from the city of Minneapolis was repeat applications for LCDA and TOD should not be penalized because we're suggesting we would give a reduced score for repeat applications. And again, I think people didn't quite understand that we only meant for projects that had received funding and were coming back for additional funding. And I think it was interpreted as applications that had been unsuccessful coming back, we're going to penalize them. But staff wasn't comfortable that we had explored all the possible scenarios where this might apply, so we're suggesting we not move forward with that anyway this year. Refinement to the engagement, jobs, and design evaluation scoring. Again, we're not penalizing anybody, but we're taking categories where, for example, in the TOD category, if you had a TOD plan, station area plan, you automatically got X number of points. We're trying to shift some of those points into giving bonuses for projects that did an exemplary design for TOD. So we're not penalizing anybody, but we're trying to reward those projects that go the extra mile. Same thing is true for engagement. And then the threshold criteria for transit-oriented development, we're eliminating that, and we didn't get any comments back about that. So I'll leave it up to Ms. Starling to give you an update on the advisory committee's input.
Mr. Chair, council members, the Equity Advisory Committee schedule was such that in order to have a conversation with the EAC prior to coming back to you and moving the entire fund distribution plan forward, we had to have that conversation on a time that Paul had scheduled himself to be out of town. So therefore, I will give the staff side of this report and hoping that Councilmember Munt can give any additional comments on this conversation from the other side of the table. So staff had gone to the Equity Advisory Committee in December to set up the conversation that we had with the Equity Advisory Committee last week, really looking for input on three key areas. One of which was looking explicitly at the composition of the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, which is not something that is directly in the fund distribution plan that's coming forward. The next is really thinking about issues of how to encourage and promote more effective community and neighborhood engagement in projects. And finally, thinking about the alignment of our scoring criteria with the equitable development scorecard that has been developed by neighborhood organizations and that has been in existence in the region for about 5 years, I think. So on the first item around the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, we brought this issue forward because in 2018, as it turned out, neither of the spots on the Livable Communities Advisory Committee that we had set up for members representing community-based or community development organizations representing underserved communities, neither of those positions ultimately was filled in 2018. So we had both recruiting challenges as well as pushback about the level of commitment that we are expecting from a volunteer committee. So I hope Councilmember Munt will agree that the EAC had a very rich conversation about this in terms of suggesting how we might restructure things in such a way that we can help get some of these voices onto the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. In terms of the overall structure, we'll be looking at making changes on this, and this will be coming forward later in 2019 rather in the fund distribution plan. But we're looking at how to adjust our recruitment and how to adjust committee structure to be most effective on this. The next item of conversation was really looking at community and neighborhood engagement in project proposals. As you know, over the last couple of years, there have been a few projects that we have really highlighted and that have been noteworthy for some of the rich community engagement that they had in project development prior to the applications before they came to us at the council. And so we're interested in how we encourage more proposals to have this rich level of community engagement. Equity Advisory Committee encourages us to ask more questions about how projects situate themselves in the needs of the immediate community, as well as to hold a workshop on how to do effective community engagement that we do plan to hold before applications are due in 2019. The final piece or question was looking at how we align scoring with the equitable development scorecard. And here EAC had a number of specific suggestions about how to phrase things and how to align things. Most of these will be coming up in the application materials rather than the fund distribution plan. But I think the Equity Advisory Committee gave us good food for thought in how to align this program most effectively to advance equitable development.
So that brings us to the other issues that we're still looking for a little feedback on, or at least filling you in on. One is the funding levels, and we've been working on making sure we fully understand the reconciliation between our grant software and our council's finance software to make sure that we know what we think we know about what's money is available, and we've been working hard on that. So we're looking at the statutory funding level for the local housing incentives account is $1.5 million. That's $1 million coming out of the council's general fund and $500,000 shifted from the demonstration account levy. We're allowed to only use interest earnings or investment earnings to shift between the accounts. We can't shift our dollars from amongst the accounts. So we do believe we've got, I should say, we know we have enough balance in the investment earnings in the LCDA account to continue to add the extra 1 million that we've been doing the last few years to the LHIA account. For the demonstration account, we've been able to, in the last couple of years, last several years, again, been able to use the extra balance that resulted both from investment earnings as well as a couple of years we didn't fully award all the funding available, and there's been a few projects that didn't move forward that relinquished their funds. We've been able to have a fairly healthy balance in the past, but because we've been using that balance over the past several years, we don't feel like there's enough to be safely adding those extra dollars this year for either the regular program or the TOD. So these two categories would be funded at for the regular program, the statutory levy amount that the council has been allocating to this regular program. And then we do still have enough in that balance, uh, both between the levy revenue and the carry forward balance to continue to fund the TOD category at $5 million, but not adding any additional funds. And it does require a budget amendment that we're trying to be a little bit more transparent about, and how we make sure that the finance budget matches up with the fund distribution plan. Now, in the tax-based revitalization account, again, we've been able to use a healthy balance to supplement the base funding, which is $5 million, which is a shift from the fiscal disparities pool to fund the base level of the tax-based revitalization. The past several years, there's been enough balance to fund the SEED program, Seeding Equitable Environmental Development, at a $1 million per year level, and the TBRA Transit-Oriented Development category at $2 million. We've had $3 million extra balance each year to fund those two categories. This year, the only extra we have beyond the $5 million is, if we spend virtually every penny, is $1.9 million to spread between those two programs or not. So that's the amount available to use or not use if you wanted to continue to have a balance for future years. Now here's a chart showing the TBRA Transit-Oriented Development Awards, and there hasn't been a huge demand for that, and we've continued to offer it as a sort of a one-stop shop for projects that that are transit-oriented development but need a cleanup too. But it hasn't been as seamless as we had hoped it would be, because you still have to apply for two separate applications because of the two separate accounts. You can't do it all at one. And another caveat I would mention here too is that the projects that are in transit station areas are still eligible to apply under the regular TBRA programs that are offered twice a year. And I believe that we've got this is the amounts requested. We've been, of the awards in the regular program, we've been about 65 to 70% of them in the last 4 years have been in transit areas. So they do have an option. It's not like if we deleted that category, there isn't anything they can apply for. On the other hand, the SEED program, this is the only place they can apply for them, because this is the only category where we offer these grants without requiring a project to be associated with them. So it hasn't been used very heavily. Most of the time it's been for investigation, contamination investigation. But as you can see, last year we had a couple that it was there. So it isn't used often, but when there is a valid project, it's nice to have that available.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask
Councilmember
about this.
Cunningham.
It seems like in 2018 it was used pretty readily.
Right.
Yeah, meaning
Mr. Chair, Councilmember
yeah,
Cunningham,
yeah.
that's my
What
point.
I thought I heard you say, it wasn't used very much, and then I'm looking at this. It seemed like a little bit of contradiction there.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that was my point, is that over the last several years, it hasn't been used heavily. But last year there was a project that was really fit the mold, and we had it available, and so it was really convenient to be able to help that project. It was a project in Hopkins.
So Paul, that 2018 grant represented here was one project in Hopkins.
Was there
Could be.
one or two? I'm sorry. Right.
And Mr. Chairman, is that in the pipeline? It sounds like. Or are there projects in the pipeline? I'm just trying to understand.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, we're a little early in the year to really know that yet. I don't think we've heard of any uh, big projects like last year, but again, if it's there, it's nice to have. So that brings us to the options that we'd like your feedback on. I'm gonna have to put my glasses back on to see that. So
One moment, Paul. We have a question. Councilmember Munt.
Mr. Chair, Paul, before you move into the options and discussion, I'd like to offer some additional input that we got after Libby presented to the Equity Advisory Committee. ACER, which is the African Center for Education and Resources in Brooklyn Park, they offered some input that may be different than what the city conveyed in their letter. What they want us to know is that Bottineau is something that they remain fully committed to. There's a lot of available land there for both housing and commercial development. So they would like to see funding, continue to invest funding in TOD. Secondly, they foresee a affordable housing crisis in Brooklyn Park. The reason for that is there are 2 apartment buildings that are project-based. Everything else could be flipped at any moment. Most of those other housing opportunities are owned by the city, and they are both over-occupied and overpriced. For them, regarding TBRA, the jobs that are created are as important as the cleanup because of the unemployment in the community. They also felt strongly that with LHIA, the projects that are able to achieve the deepest affordability for folks under 30% of the AMI are the projects where both Minnesota Housing and Livable Communities are funding projects together. So that was the input offered by ACER, and they are looking to offer a letter from the Blue Line Coalition, as well as from ACER, reflecting those comments.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any reaction or comments to those. I don't think those comments are inconsistent with the directions that we're heading here. So it's good to hear that kind of interest. I would point out that the city of Brooklyn Park indicated they didn't have any cleanup projects in the pipeline yet for next year, nor did Hopkins. So
Thank you. More information is always better. Thank you, Councilmember Munn.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, one thing I would point out is that as the chart indicates, some of these options, options A, B, or C, if we spent that money this year, that means neither category of seed or TBRA TOD would be available in 2020 if they were all awarded.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, I'll just add, Paul is assuming that all projects funded will come through. Certainly, if there are relinquishments and projects fall through, which tends to be less likely in TBRA relative to the other accounts, there could be relinquishments coming back. And we do anticipate that there'd be some interest earnings and investment earnings on TBRA. But certainly it would be at a much smaller scale in that the fund balance, we have largely moved the fund balance into projects that are taking place.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Mr. Chairman, I have two things. One, I want to understand this chart a little bit more because I'm trying to understand B, C, and D. Some combination of B, C, and D or options B, C, and D. Uh, and so I'm trying to understand what, and then it says results in no balance for 2020. And so I'm saying, okay, I'm not following what that really means for me. So other people might get it, but I actually didn't. So help me out.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, think of this as we have about $1.9 million that we are trying to determine what to do with.
Yep,
So
got that.
one piece of this is that if all of this goes out in 2019, the additional resources with which we have been feathering the TBRA account are gone. And so that next year's, the additional amount would be considerably smaller.
I see. Okay,
So one option is to just hold on to that for the future, or hold on to a portion of that for future years, or put all of it out right now because there are development opportunities that can use the funding.
Mr. Chairman, that was very helpful and very succinct. Appreciate the explanation.
Councilmember Cunningham, I also looked at this matrix a couple times, wanting to make sure I understood, its findings, so I understand where you're coming from.
Mr. Chairman, how I sum it up is either we are going to spend the money now or we're going to hold it for later. And in these combination of options gets us to various iterations of that amount that would be available for the following year. And so my question then on that is, how much demand do we have? It sounds like the TOD fund, which I actually fought for, as you recall, hasn't had any additional demand, even though I had a number of cities coming to us saying that there was demand there. So I feel like, okay, we certainly could do something with that now. I'm in a better position now to make the argument that maybe that's where we make the change.
Councilmember Cunningham, I'm glad you raised that because to some degree we sort of skipped over this first question, should we offer all the grant categories? And I see that argument you're making, that, based on the data that we have from the last several rounds, it seems like the marketplace, if you will, is giving us a signal that that's not the highest kind of priority funding stream that we're offering. That the regular TBRA remains really robust, it continues to grow. There's a lot of demand for that. I guess my feeling is I always want to support experimentation and see what, how an agency can more effectively meet its goals. That feels to me to some degree like an example of where we've done that. We've offered that for a series of years and I think had some good outcomes, but it does seem that there's less interest year after year for that. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not only has there not been interest for the past several years, but TOD projects have been scoring very well in the regular program. So to me, that's a pretty good case for simplification.
So, Mr. Chairman, I yield that, given that it's not being used, and, I certainly gave the cities plenty ample opportunity. That made the case last year to me, and my colleagues actually agreed to the compromise around that. I'm certainly willing to move reasonably in changing that, the public funding around that. I haven't heard anything from the city of Minneapolis with regards to this since they were one of the cities that were making a case, but I think there were other cities as well, or will consider, if I recall. So, from my point of view, given that we haven't had the uses, I'm willing to change where I'm coming from in order to make this work and leave some money for future councils to allocate in the following year. And I think that's $5 million, if I understood that correct. And then if you just took a portion of that, then that would leave something over for others. So I'm simplifying this, I'm sure, but that would be my recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I should clarify that in my verbal conversation with a staff person from Minneapolis this afternoon, I was told that their position on the TBRA TOD has not changed from last March.
Yeah, but mine has,
Oh.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that
Their position could be anything it wants, but mine has changed. So.
I didn't want to misrepresent the city of Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, Councilmember Cunningham, is the direction that you're suggesting, are you suggesting use some portion of the $1.9 million balance towards seed and TBRA and some reserve as well to give flexibility to the succeeding council? Is that
That is correct, Mr.
okay?
Chairman.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
It's just a
positive
recommendation.
direction. I'm interested in that. What do other committee members' sentiments? Councilmember Wolf.
Well, since the regular TBRA program has been getting oversubscribed, I think it is a good idea to put some more money in there. And I would agree, if we're going to put some into seed as well, that we should keep a little bit for next year.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a firm number unless somebody else wants to suggest a firm number.
And Councilmember Wolf, you mean provide some funding to seed so that the 2021 or 2020 round would not be essentially exhausted by moves made now in 2019.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're waiting for somebody to throw out numbers, Mr. Chair, I could throw out some potential numbers. My suggestion would be of the 1.9 million, put 0.9 into this year's regular program and $500,000 this year, leave $500,000 for next year for seed.
Mm-hmm. That's feels appropriate to me. Committee members?
Mr. Chairman, I could go with those numbers. I mean, the real question is just the balance here, trying to reserve something for the future council.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just, spending all the money this year. And I'd say even if we have demand, giving that council some flexibility. I won't be here, so some of you may, but giving them the flexibility in the future makes sense. So, that'll kind of off the top kind of analysis may very well work.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been quiet about this because relatively speaking, this is a teardrop in the bucket. So I wouldn't want to throw a lot of administration at this and struggle with this. There are so many unknowns floating around right now. What's going to be challenging for us 2 months from now, 3 months from now, financially? I wouldn't struggle with this. I'm more concerned about whatever the number is that Councilmember Wolf threw out or floated is effectiveness. So if we said we're going to put aside $8 or we're going to put aside $900,000, will that set aside or the reserve or a balance be effective then to do anything? It may or may not be. I don't know. So that's why if someone showed up on February 15th with a project that's viable, I'd say blow it, get it done. But that's just my bias about getting something done that's going to be effective rather than saying, well, let's do the perfect thing and administer $28,000 for May. So that's just my whining. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're looking for effectiveness and measurable outcomes in the near term, the regular TBRA program is going to be more so because seed can go to property that has no development potential at all. So if you're arguing less for seed, I mean, I'm willing to listen to that.
I'm just arguing for effectiveness, that's all.
You just like to argue.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I could, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the reason I asked what the pipeline was, to try to figure out where the demand was.
We don't know.
But what I'm hearing is we don't really know that yet. So I'd rather, and this is a risk management question of how much do you want to hedge your bets for the future. That's really that's really the, they call it a discount. Yeah. How much do you want to discount today for what you can pay for tomorrow, or what we can distribute tomorrow?
Right. Paul and Libby, is this direction have the kind of specificity you will find useful, or
Mr. Chair, as
not?
long as the numbers that have been put on the table are the ones that you're looking forward to seeing when this item comes back to you at your next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, when will this be back before us?
I believe February
Yeah.
4th, our
Yeah.
coming meeting.
Oh.
Councilmember Wolf.
Mr. Chair, are we still talking about the LCDA accounts and stuff too? Because I didn't make comments when that came through the first time. So if I have the opportunity to do that now, I
Please
would
go
like.
ahead.
I was looking at the, what is it, the Equitable Development Scorecard online. I pulled it up while we were doing this, and there's a lot of things in there that are very core oriented in the scoring, and I would be concerned about switching our scoring if it's going to happen in such a way that, like Maple Plain and little communities or suburbs would not qualify because it assumes transit service and a certain level of other services that are not available throughout the region. So if we were going to change the scoring, it needs to be a much bigger conversation than just with the Equity Advisory Committee.
You're a little more familiar with the conversation.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I'll take Paul's tossing this one to me. So one of the key things that doesn't always show up well to you in what you see on livable communities is that all of our scoring is very much customized to what works for larger communities that are well connected versus what are the needs of smaller communities. That level of detail doesn't always show up in, for example, the fund distribution plan, but when we start peeling away the layers of the onion, that's absolutely one of our guiding principles in how we do the scoring. So thank you for the reminder. And yes, this is something that we do try and keep in mind as we're doing all of the evaluation.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add to that, the staff have individually in each of the accounts gone through the Equitable Development Scorecard and tried to compare how our scoring might relate to the categories in the scorecard, and where it has applied, we've adjusted the language to be compatible. Where it didn't apply, we didn't add anything in, and we're adding information in the application guides, encouraging people to take a look at using the scorecard in the development of their projects. So, and again, as Libby mentioned, and you may remember from last year's work with the Metro Cities group, we scale our reviews to the context of the community.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do recall that. I just don't want to scare communities from even applying, because if you're Farmington and you're never going to have all-day transit service, those sorts of questions can scare you away.
And Mr. Chair, that's a component of we're going to do everything we can to reassure those smaller communities that yes, you can compete. Whatever the category it is, you can compete, and we compare apples and apples community-wise.
Councilmember Munn.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I did a workshop at Revolution about the Equitable Development Scorecard, and as Paul said, it is scalable and it's not project specific. And so the real intent is to create a framework whereby a city can engage stakeholders in planning for and benefiting from public investments. So it's something that would work for Farmington as well as it would work for Southwest LRT.
Councilmember Wolf.
Mr. Chair, in Councilmember Munt, I get that. It's just some of the things that are focuses in the Equitable Development Scorecard, like housing for people below 30% of AMI, doesn't work well in places that don't have any services, don't have a grocery store. You know, the city of Elko Newmarket doesn't have a grocery store. They have no transit. And when I talk to even the social workers that are trying to place people in spots, if they do get housing for the very, very low income and ones that are held open for people who are currently experiencing homeless or that sort of thing, they have a hard time filling them in those places because there's no supports. You can't walk to the grocery store. You have to leave town and drive to do everything. So if you can't drive or you don't own a car, those places are very difficult to live in, and that's not going to change between now and 2040.
Okay. Well,
Chair, we do
Paul?
have a couple more FYI
Okay.
items. Just to let you know that now the D line, the BRT D line, is now going to be eligible. Stations on that line are going to be eligible for TOD development grants. And this is just our timeline. Again, I touched on this earlier. We've had conversations. The February 4th Community Development Committee meeting is where we're going to be looking to you folks to approve the plan and pass it on to the full council. Their meeting on February 13th. Notice funding availability will come out in March, and even before that, as I mentioned, we'll be conducting the design team process for the LCDA and the TOD grants. First applications will be due May 1st.
Very good. I think that concludes our conversation. Thank you for a good discussion. I think we're on the right track for February 4th. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
look forward to the next steps. Thank you. With that, members, I think we can be adjourned. Thank you for the meeting.
Thank you.